Once again, good morning, John. Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us again this morning for Coffee with Chesto. John, some news that broke overnight for some retailers surrounding their employees and kind of their operation. I think that's a great place for us to start. Can you share what you know about kind of the situation for retailers bringing some employees back?
Yeah, so this is a big deal for the small businesses that are in the retail business because in Massachusetts, it was one of the few, if not the only state that did not allow retailers to allow their employers to come inside the store, even with the doors locked, to fulfill online and phone orders. But that changed yesterday. The Retailers Association of Massachusetts has been lobbying the Baker administration heavily over the last few weeks to allow its members to essentially reopen their stores. So they're sort of mini Amazons, mini fulfillment centers. So your local bookshop or your local running shoe store, you could call up or go online and order something from them. In the past, only the owners of those businesses could go into those stores, but now certain limited number of employees can join them, which makes it much easier for those owners, obviously, to fulfill orders. I knew of one store owner that was driving around Lexington delivering, delivering shoes to people himself because he couldn't bring employees in to a store. So this is a pretty big deal. And it gives you kind of an idea of how the Baker administration will reopen the economy when it's ready. Hopefully May 18th. You know, there's limited, free employees for 10 feet. It's pretty limited. There's temperature checks and sanitation requirements. But it's nice to see the retailers get a victory because they've had a real hard go of it in the last few weeks.
Definitely. How do you think this relates to kind of the PPP and what are some of the economic impacts you might see from, I assume, people being able to go back to work on the employee side?
Well, this is actually a really big issue for PPP because retailers and restaurants who wanted to take advantage of it had to hire people back or have people on payrolls by the end of June. And so many of them are not even sure when they're going to be able to come back. So now that they're able to bring employees back into the location, they'll be able to take better advantage of the PPP. I think it's actually come in just at the right time, particularly for the second round of PPP, for retailers to benefit from it.
Does this affect restaurants as well, or just retailers?
This is just retailers. This is sort of it's all about online fulfillment. So if you want to bring someone in, or remote fulfillment, it's called. So some people still do order over the phone. If you want to bring someone in to help you take those orders and then put them back, you can. Like I said, it's a limited number, only three people if your store is under 10,000 square feet, and then the number goes up slightly from there for bigger stores. But I think it can start paving the way for reopening these businesses.
Definitely. We have one or two questions that came in kind of about retail and restaurants, so we'll get to those. But wanted to point out to everybody, we are taking live questions, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A box. And all you have to do to submit a question for John is just type it into the box, and then it'll pop up on our end. And we'll be happy to take some live questions at the end, and I would encourage everybody to do so. But we do have a couple questions, and one in particular kind of relates to this. You talked a little bit about the process going into reopening. We had a question around retail and restaurants potentially raising prices to account for social distancing or having to operate at a certain capacity. Have you heard anything from business owners or kind of around the city around, reopening strategy in terms of, accounting potentially for, some of the losses or, the attempt to break even with those restrictions?
Well, it's a great question. No one expects the occupancy to be the same when we reopen. In fact, I've heard that we won't have, regular occupancy levels for restaurants back until after we have a vaccine, which could be 18 months, 2 years away. So obviously that's going to hurt revenue significantly for restaurants and to some extent for retailers because they will not, be able to. They'll have to limit who can come in the door. much more severely than in the past. But I would be surprised if they're, given the state of the economy, if there'll be price increases. I think restaurants are going to have to do everything they can to bring people in the door, especially as people are going to be reluctant to go out to eat for a few different, for cost reasons and for sanitary reasons. Perhaps maybe overly fearful or maybe too fearful. I mean, I have to say I'm looking forward to getting back out there and going out to eat. I think you're going to see restaurants, many places will be allowed to set up tables outside where they hadn't before. There might be some streets that'll be closed so restaurants can do that. But I still think they're going to take a hit in revenue. I would be surprised though in fact, maybe prices actually might come down slightly at restaurants. And to some extent, the dynamic's the same at retail. The prices at retail stores don't change as much as at restaurants, but I think it's a similar dynamic.
Interesting. Yeah, I was reading Florida's reopening guidelines, and for restaurants, it was outdoor seating allowed and 25% capacity for indoor seating. So it should be interesting. Do you think, Charlie Baker and Marty Walsh, do you think they're going to be monitoring kind of Florida and the other states that are a little bit ahead of us in terms of the reopening, and then, maybe business owners could expect similar?
Yeah, I think one thing to look at is closer to home in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is reopening stores this weekend coming up, and there are occupancy limits and sort of even in smaller stores, they're going to be right of way on one-way directions through the stores like there are with supermarkets. So I do think the administration's paying attention to what's working and what's not working in other states. I think this administration is, I would say, on the cautious side about reopening in comparison to other states. I think that's probably a good thing. I don't get the sense that business owners in Massachusetts want the administration to be anything other than cautious at this time. So I think they'll look to see what some of the other states, Maine is also gradually reopening, and I think they'll look to states in the Northeast in particular. But that's not to say they won't pay attention to what's happening in Florida too.
Definitely. We have a couple live questions and one question that came in before about construction. Anything around criteria for construction sites that are still shut down, looking to reopen? Do you know anything about, the timeline and also the requirements, to reopen?
Well, I think I can speak for Boston. I know that the city is obviously frozen all but the most modest construction projects in Boston. Statewide, it varies from town to town, but the statewide rule is you cannot do commercial construction of any size, although residential construction is still allowed in most communities, but not in Boston. I think Boston's already working very closely with the development and construction industry to develop rules. And I think there's going to be an effort to make sure that those rules are somewhat uniform throughout the state. So I do think we're going to see a gradual reintroduction of safety procedures. I'm hopeful that there'll be limited commercial construction starting up again on May 18th, but I don't have any inside information about that. Gotcha.
We have one question about kind of the city of Boston and the economy. What do you think about potential tax revenues that are lost, that are kind of affected by the declining business at the restaurants and the hotels in the city? Do you see any short-term, long-term effects kind of on the city because of those losses?
Well, I assume the question is about the city government.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it, in Boston, the mayor just said he's going to avoid layoffs. I do think that you're seeing cities in general pare back all sorts of projects and part-time hires that they might do, or seasonal hires that they might do. It's going to be a real tough time for budget writers in cities, probably all over the country, but here in Massachusetts, because property taxes are such a major part of their revenue. But that to some extent is an advantage for cities here in Massachusetts, because even though it'll be harder for some people to pay property taxes, they're still not going to be as volatile as, say, hotel taxes, which don't go to the city. The hotel taxes primarily go to the state's general fund. A little bit of it trickles back in terms of tourism promotion. There are obviously, and there's a small portion that does go of that amount that goes to cities and towns, but it's compared to the municipal budgets, it's really minor. So I don't think that, the hotel taxes are going to take a huge hit. The effect on cities will be minimal from that. Restaurant taxes, that's a big deal too, and some of that there are local options for that too. I think, to some extent, where the property tax mechanism, the reason most of the revenue comes from property taxes, and I think that'll help, I would say, shield or buttress city budgets from the worst. I think the state budget's going to have a harder time of it because income tax is such a major driver of state budget. I do see some cuts coming, maybe not huge layoffs, but I think, assuming that most property taxes, even if they're late, do get paid, I think the city budget should be, will still be largely intact.
Gotcha. We have one question about commercial leases. Is there anything that you're hearing around the city from business owners or landlords around, the commercial leases, the relationships between, the tenant and whatnot? Anything you're hearing about companies being proactive, or any stories at all that you could share?
Well, this is a huge issue for small businesses right now. Some landlords are being, I would say, flexible, but I think many small businesses are finding it frustrating as they're dealing with, these huge bills. We just had the May bill was due, and I don't think they're going to get much more revenue in time for June. There have been changes on the housing side statewide to sort of help, ease the burden on renters, but there hasn't been the same, and I think it's probably because it's a bit more complex, hasn't been the same sort of crackdown on landlords on the commercial side. So there's a give and take that's happening pretty much across the city, across the state, as tenants who have almost no revenue are basically telling the landlord, hey, I can't pay. You can kick me out, but you're going to have an empty space for a long time if you do it. And some of them are doing it more forcefully than others, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. We've heard from our small business community through Slack. The business owners finding the most success are being proactive rather than just waiting for the landlord to come to them to have the conversation. So for any business owners looking for advice, that's kind of what we've heard from other business owners. So one question we had, any predictions around in-home services and how those might work in the future?
Well, I think that obviously you're going to find that businesses are much more careful when they're going in. Maybe they're not going to send as many people in to, I don't know if you're cleaning or if you're a plumber might work alone. I can tell you on the Cape, the cleaning services are now basically saying, give us 24 hours after someone leaves for a turnover of a house for rental, and they're using much more strict procedures for cleaning. So I think you're going to see variations on that. I don't think you're going to see, because with in-home services, there's so many different industries that it applies to. I don't think you're going to see sort of a uniform rule or one size fits all rule. In fact, I think you're going to see, because I think you're going to see variable approaches even within certain industries. So if you're looking to hire somebody, you might want to find out what their approaches are and compare, because I think there's going to be a variety of them.
Definitely. So a big part of the coronavirus crisis, obviously social distancing. Most of us have been in our homes for almost 2 months. Talk a little bit about the economic impact. The person who put this question owns a catering business. If we can't do social gatherings, over 10 people, a business like a catering business it's going to struggle. They can't service a large group. So what do you see as potential, economic fallout or disadvantages for businesses that kind of, they generate the revenue through large groups?
Yeah, this is going to be a big problem because I don't see large group gatherings happening for a long time. I'm sad to say, but I don't think, you might maybe 10 goes to 25 or 50 at some point. But the businesses I'm talking to have no plans. In fact, they're deliberately redesigning their offices to minimize even gatherings of 10. So yeah, I feel like catering is going to unfortunately be a business that's really going to get hammered by this, even when we do reopen. So the impact is going to be big. Unfortunately, I feel like companies that are in that line of work that depend on events are going to have to pivot a bit and find new ways to bring in revenue, particularly during this time the vaccine is widely available.
So one question that just came to mind out of our Slack community is about restaurants. Obviously, we've talked about, reopening at 25% capacity or whatever the capacity is, and we're talking about, social gatherings and stuff like that. What do you see as kind of the future of potential ghost kitchens around the city? For those who don't know what a ghost kitchen is, it's basically just a restaurant that has no seating, delivery only, sometimes takeout as well as an option. Do you think we'll see kind of a rise of, that business model kind of around the city in the restaurant industry?
I think we will. I think, this was already happening before the pandemic. It was sort of I don't know if I'd call it a secret, but it was sort of something that really upset a lot of local restaurants. Maybe in the last year or two, we're starting to see some of these ghost kitchens open up. And obviously they can thrive they're sort of built for COVID-19 time, so they can thrive in this era. But I also do think that, people are loyal to their local restaurants. And I think that, that if local restaurants are, locally owned restaurants that have seating are really work with their mailing lists and with their regular customers, they can hold on to their customers through this. It's, part of the restaurant experience is knowing the people who are in charge there and knowing the people who work there. So I think they have to maintain connections to their customers to sort of ward off the threat of these ghost kitchens. But I do think we'll see more of the ghost kitchens too.
Definitely. Are there any ghost kitchen, models around the city that you know of, or anything like that you could point to as an example?
When you say models, I don't.
Yeah. Are there any restaurants that you know of around the city that operate currently under kind of the ghost kitchen model?
There are. I mean, I can't think of them offhand. There are a few, but what I don't know is whether they're continuing in the pandemic. They don't. They sort of, they work. It's almost like, they have different names for their. You might have like a kitchen that might do Chinese and pizza, and they'll have a different name of the business depending, for a different website, but it'll be the same business. Right. And so it's kind of hard to know, like the names they market themselves as aren't exactly the same always as their true business names.
That is true. They're called ghost kitchens for a reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So one question came in around airports. What are your thoughts on airports and, the reopening plans for any airports that are closed? And I guess this person's kind of asking about, just the travel industry just in general.
Yeah, it's going to be, the airports around here are still open and people are still traveling, but it's very limited. I mean, these flights are sometimes only have a few people on flight. And I think it's going to be tricky because the airlines want to maintain social distancing on the flights. And this is totally antithetical to the way they used to do business, where they pack us all in like sardines. And I do think a lot of people, I think the airlines, though, at the same time, there's not going to be huge demand. Business travel is going to be very slow to come back, probably even slower than leisure travel. And I think that airlines are going to have to I guess what I'd say is you're going to find more, the fewer direct connections as airlines pare back their flights. So it's going to take longer to get places. I'm very much worried about the regional airports, the TF Greens, the Worcesters, and the Manchester airports, airlines are kind of, because they have to cut back, they'd rather focus on the bigger, busier airports, use busier in a relative sense right now. And so, but even the big, busier airports are really going to struggle. I suspect Logan Airport, I mean, traffic is down 95% there. I suspect so much of their revenue is dependent on landing fees that they're struggling financially. So we are going to see changes at the airports, for sure. Especially because it's going to take a while before, even if it is really safe, it's going to take a while for passengers to feel safe. I think business travel, from the one I'm talking about, talking to companies, so many of them are cutting back on business travel right now.
Definitely. So we had one question just come in. It's a little bit of a longer question, but more asking about kind of the job economy, in particular for younger people who, were either just graduating college or maybe were in their first or second job and got laid off. The scope of the question is kind of, how do you think this is going to affect the service economy? Are younger people going to be going back to school? What's kind of the outlook for, individuals who are, 22 to 30 years old who might have just got laid off? And what's kind of the outlook of the overall job economy for that demographic?
I guess I'd say is that even though we've seen a lot of tech companies cut jobs recently, I would say in terms of the tech world, I think there's still going to be a lot of hiring. I mean, I know of a number of companies that are expanding now. So I think there'll still be opportunities for people coming out of college. The lower income bracket jobs, sort of the jobs that you take during the summer to help pay the bills. And to be honest, for some people, jobs that they have to work. Cleaning is a good example. I feel like those are the jobs really taking the hit. Most of the jobs that are back in this pandemic are jobs that involve close personal contact, and oftentimes those are the same jobs that are held by lower wage earners. So I see that's really going to be the hardest part of the economy to come back. And I think small businesses in particular, which is why the Congress put together the PPP, I think small businesses in particular are going to struggle because they don't have the capital that larger companies have to fall back on. And I feel like, we're going to see, I don't know, the estimates are anywhere between 20% and 50% of small businesses wiped out because of this. I'm much more hopeful about the lower number, but I think that means that people who are looking for jobs are most likely going to be looking for jobs at bigger employers. Gotcha.
Makes sense. Probably have time for one or two more questions. One that just came in. Any thoughts on movie theaters? Do you see them closing altogether or just reducing, people similar to, restaurants and their seating capacities? What's kind of the outlook for movie theaters?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one I've kind of struggled with. I think the industry struggled with this. The restaurants can just take a few tables and chairs out, but of course, with movie theaters, the seats are sort of more in a fixed position, and a number of movie theaters have just sort of replaced their seats already to make, put in higher end, more luxurious seats. I think, and are they going to change those out again? And then when time comes when we can go back to full occupancy, are they going to have to swap seats back in? I think there's going to be, my guess is they're probably just going to limit the number of people that can go in and maybe stagger where they sit. The newer movie theaters have assigned seating. So I think you might find that when you go to buy a ticket online, it might limit you to, if it's, 3 people that you can buy the tickets together, but, if there are tickets around, then the seats around you will be blocked. But, I don't know how that movie theaters make money if they cut their capacity down to 50%. It's going to be a real struggle.
Yeah, it's definitely, look, some revenue's better than none, but still it's going to be a long road back for sure. Probably the last question for today, it's a good one. Do you think this crisis will accelerate the gig economy? the effect on employers realizing who maybe have never done remote work before, either the positive or negative side of remote work. Do you think it's going to kind of accelerate the gig economy moving forward?
Well, I think, certainly we're seeing delivery businesses and the gig workers that work, that aren't technically employees that work for delivery businesses, really surging right now. So I think, companies, I miss being in the office, and I'm not a huge fan of work from home. I'm here sitting at my dining room table, which is not an ideal place to be working. But I know a lot of companies are thinking we can't go back to 100% in the office probably ever. So work from home is going to be a much bigger factor. And so the industries that serve those work from home people are obviously going to do well. And so I do think there's going to be a surge of gig workers. I think you see this anytime there's a large number of layoffs like we just had, the people go into business for themselves, in part because they just have to. And so that'll drive the rise in the gig economy too. But with that comes some of the shortcomings, like benefits. How do we make sure that workplace rules apply? I think it's going to present some tricky issues for policymakers going forward.
Yeah, it definitely should be interesting to watch. I'll give you the floor, John. Any closing thoughts, arguments, anything you got for the group?
I wish I had some words of wisdom. Just hope everyone stay safe and healthy. It's going to be, I know this is a recurring theme, but I keep hoping for the best in terms of return. But the new normal is going to look so different than what we knew before we all left in March. And so just to be braced for that, I think even if the governor does open the doors on May 18th, what the economy is going to look like is going to look very different. And as always, if you have questions, please reach out. My email is jon.chesto at globe.com. That's jon.chesto at globe.com.
Awesome. We'll be back next Tuesday, 10 a.m. for our weekly Coffee with Chesto. Appreciate everyone tuning in. As always, Jon, thank you for your time. This is great. Really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next Tuesday. Stay safe.